I confessed everything to my own reflection in a Rain Street hospital window on September 9, 2021, that I'd let my stepmother steal my dead mother's college trust to buy my stepsister a $58,000 wedding at the Peninsula Chicago, and that my fiancé had been sleeping with that same stepsister for 14 months. I said it out loud, to no one, because I already knew I was dying. Then a semi-truck found my Honda on the Kennedy Expressway during a summer storm, and the last thing I remembered was the sound of my own name on a paramedic's radio, fading like static. The next thing I remembered was waking up in my dorm room at Northwestern University's Bob Hall on September 9, 2019, exactly 2 years earlier, to the hour, with every second of my own death still burning behind my eyes. I want to be clear about what kind of person I was before that night on the expressway, because none of what came after makes sense unless you understand how thoroughly I trained myself to disappear for other people's comfort. I was the good daughter. The dutiful stepdaughter. The girl who skipped her own 19th birthday dinner because Brielle Voss had a boutique launch crisis and needed someone to drive her to Milwaukee at midnight. The girl who covered 3 of Brielle's shifts at my father's rental office so she could go to Cabo, who gave up a summer research fellowship at the University of Chicago because Renata said the family needed me around the summer Brielle got engaged. I told myself that love meant absorbing whatever the people around me couldn't carry themselves. I was 22 years old the first time I died, and it took dying to understand that none of them had ever once absorbed anything for me. My mother, Elaine Ashcroft, died of ovarian cancer in June of 2011, when I was 12. She left behind a trust at First Lakeshore Trust Bank on North Michigan Avenue, $220,000, earmarked in the paperwork, word for word, for Nora's education, undergraduate through terminal degree. My father, Walter Ashcroft, who owns Ashcroft Builders, a mid-sized commercial contracting company on West Fulton Street, was named trustee until I turned 25 or entered a graduate program, whichever came first. He cried at the reading of that document. I remember that. It didn't stop him from later signing away every dollar of it without ever quite admitting to himself what he was doing. He remarried in 2014. Renata Voss came with a 5-year-old boutique dream, a talent for crying exactly when it served her, and a daughter, Brielle, 11 months older than me. For years I believed we were sisters. I found out, in the worst week of my first life, that Renata had never once thought of me as anything but a line item with a due date. It started small, the way rot always does. In the spring of 2018, Renata sat across from my father at our kitchen table on Burling Street and called it borrowing. Brielle wanted to open a boutique in Lincoln Park. Brielle and Bloom, she'd already named it, logo and all, and Renata suggested, so casually I remember the exact tilt of her coffee cup, that they used some of Nora's fund, just to bridge the gap, since Nora's not touching it for years anyway. My father, who forged concrete bids for a living and somehow could not read a 5-page trust document, agreed. He signed. Or he let her sign for him. I never got a straight answer, in either life, on how many of those authorizations at First Lakeshore actually carried his real signature and how many carried Renata's careful forgery of it. By September of 2021, when I needed $86,000 for my second year at Feinberg School of Medicine, the trust held $412. Renata told me this over steak at RPM Steak on West Kinsey Street at a dinner billed as a wedding shower for Brielle and her fiancé, Colton Pace. 11 guests watched her raise a champagne flute and laugh. "Family comes first, Nora," she said. "Don't be dramatic. You're smart, you'll figure something out. You always do." My father studied his plate. Brielle didn't even look up from her phone. Nobody at that table said my name again for the rest of the night, and I sat there smiling, because that's what the old Nora did. She smiled through the exact moment her future got sold out from under her, because making a scene felt like a worse crime than the theft itself. I found the second wound 4 days later. I was picking up dry cleaning for my fiancé, Grant Ferris, a third-year surgical resident at Northwestern Memorial, when a folded hotel folio slid out of his jacket pocket. The Talbot Hotel on East Delaware Place, room charges going back 14 months, split between his card and a second name I recognized before I even finished reading it. Brielle Voss. I called Sadie Kwan, my college roommate, the woman I'd called my best friend since freshman orientation, because I needed someone to tell me I was wrong. She didn't tell me I was wrong. She told me, in a small, ashamed voice, that Renata had been paying her $3,000 a month to run Brielle and Bloom's social media, and that she decided her rent mattered more than my dignity a long time ago. I worked 2 overnight shifts a week as a medical scribe at Northwestern Memorial that final month, trying to cover the tuition gap myself, sleeping 4 hours a night, losing 11 pounds without noticing. I was exhausted and hollowed out and driving home on I-90 in a storm on September 9, 2021, when a semi-truck jackknifed across 3 lanes ahead of me. I don't remember the impact. I remember rain on the glass, and the radio call with my name in it, and then nothing, and then Bob Hall, and morning light, and an acceptance letter from Feinberg still unopened on my desk. The rule announced itself before I understood anything else about what had happened to me. I kept every memory. Every dollar amount, every lie, every date, every betrayal, all of it came back with me, whole and unerodable, like scar tissue that had somehow grown in reverse. I checked my phone with shaking hands, September 9, 2019, 6:47 in the morning. I checked the voicemail app, a message from Renata, time-stamped 4 minutes earlier, inviting me to Sunday brunch on Burling Street to talk about something exciting for Brielle. I had heard that exact voicemail before, word for word, 2 years and 1 death ago. Whatever had brought me back, a truck, a trust fund, some cosmic clerical error in the universe's paperwork, it hadn't given me powers, or money, or a warning system. It had given me exactly one thing, a second September 9th, and full knowledge of every mistake the first one had cost me. The old Nora would have gone to that brunch and smiled and said yes to whatever they asked of her. The Nora who woke up in Bob Hall had a different thought, and it arrived cold and complete, like a verdict already handed down. I was done bleeding so other people could look full. I went to brunch anyway. I smiled anyway. I let Renata float her temporary bridge idea for Brielle's boutique in front of my father exactly the way she had the first time, and I said nothing to stop it. That was the hardest part of the entire plan, sitting on my hands while I watched the first cut open again, knowing exactly how deep it would go before anyone noticed the bleeding. But I understood something the first Nora never had. If I fought Renata in that kitchen, I would lose, the same way I had lost every argument with her for 7 years, because my father would always choose the peace of agreeing with his wife over the discomfort of protecting his daughter. The only fight worth having was one where I controlled the terrain, the timing, and the proof. So I didn't fight. I disappeared into competence instead. I met with a trust and estate attorney named Sonia Marsh at her office on LaSalle Street that October, ostensibly to understand my mother's wishes better. She read the trust language twice and looked up at me over her glasses. Any withdrawal for a beneficiary who isn't you is almost certainly a fiduciary breach, she said. But without documentation, it's your word against a signed authorization. Start keeping records, Ms. Ashcroft. Everything. Dates, statements, anything that comes through the mail. I started photographing every first Lakeshore statement before Renata could intercept the envelope, the way she always had, the way I had never once noticed before I'd already died not noticing it. I hired a private investigator that winter, a retired Chicago PD detective named Frank Delgado who worked out of a one-room office above a currency exchange on Milwaukee Avenue. "You're awfully young to need someone like me," he said, sizing me up over a folder of blank intake forms. "I'm awfully motivated," I told him, and paid his retainer in cash from scribe shifts. I told him only what he needed to document: Brielle and Bloom's finances, Grant Ferris's movements, and anything involving Titan Capital Partners, a subprime commercial lender run by a man named Curtis Bain, who I remembered, from a life Frank would never believe, extending a predatory personal guarantee loan once the boutique's second location went underwater. Frank didn't ask why a 20-year-old wanted any of this. He just billed me $200 a week and delivered. I applied, quietly, for the Hollister Distinguished Scholars Award through Feinberg, full tuition, merit-based, no family financial disclosure required, with a letter of recommendation from Dr. Loretta Vance, my organic chemistry professor. "You've always had this in you," she told me the day I asked, not knowing she was echoing something she'd said to me once already, in a life she'd never get to remember. I won it in March of 2020. I told no one at home. I opened a second account at Continental Trust under my own name and funneled every scribe paycheck and every dollar of stipend into it, and Renata never saw a single statement. I stayed with Grant, because ending things early would have told everyone something in me had changed, and because I needed him calm and unsuspecting while Frank quietly built a file. It cost me something to hold his hand at dinner, knowing what those hands had already done in a life he'd never remember living. The old Nora needed love to feel safe. This Nora needed leverage to feel safe, And leverage required patience I hadn't known I had until I'd already run out of it once. There were nights I almost broke. In January of 2021, watching my father sign yet another set of papers, Renata slid in front of him without reading. This time a personal guarantee tying Ashcroft Builders' commercial assets to a $340,000 Titan capital loan for the Bucktown expansion. I almost grabbed his hand and told him everything. I almost said, "Dad, I've done this before. I've watched this exact signature ruin you once already." I didn't. I told myself the man who signed that guarantee without reading it was the same man who would sign the next one, and the one after that, no matter what I said, because he had never once in either life chosen to actually look. The person who changed everything was Adrian Cole. I met him in April of 2020, in the family lounge outside the cardiac ICU at Northwestern Memorial, where his father was recovering from a bypass and I was working an overnight scribe shift. Adrian ran Coldwater Capital Partners, a distressed debt firm on North Wacker Drive that bought defaulted commercial loans for pennies and restructured what could be saved. He noticed, in the middle of his father's medical crisis, that I'd caught a documentation error in the attendings notes that would have delayed discharge by 2 days. "You read everything twice," he said. "Most people don't read anything once." He asked for my number that night, he told me later, because he collected people who paid attention. I let him collect me. It turned out to be the smartest decision of either of my lives. I never once asked Adrian to hurt my family, and I want that on the record even now. I only ever told him the truth about Titan Capital Partners over dinner at Girl and the Goat in the fall of 2020, that I'd heard, through the hospital grapevine, that Titan was overexposed and sloppy with due diligence on its personal guarantee book. "Interesting," was all he said, turning the thought over the way he turned over everything, like a coin he was deciding whether to spend. Coldwater's team looked into it on its own timeline, for its own reasons, and found exactly what I already knew they would. I did none of the digging that mattered. I just made sure the people who could dig were pointed toward the right hole, and then I stepped back and let gravity do the rest. Coldwater Capital acquired Titan Capital Partners' entire distressed loan book in January of 2021 for 11 cents on the dollar. A routine acquisition that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with Titan's collapsing balance sheet. Adrian didn't know, when his firm bought that portfolio, that one of the defaulted guarantees inside it belonged to my father. I found out when Sonia Marsh called me in February, her voice careful, to tell me Coldwater Capital Partners was calling in a $340,000 personal guarantee against Ashcroft Builders, effective immediately, with the company's real estate on West Fulton Street named as collateral. I broke my engagement to Grant Ferris in March of 2021, quietly, without explanation, 2 weeks before news of the Fulton Street property hit a Crane's Chicago business filing note that Renata, of all people, forwarded to the entire family group chat, not understanding yet what it meant. The family Renata built collapsed the way sandcastles do, not all at once, but everywhere at the same time. Ashcroft Builders filed Chapter 11 in April of 2021. The Burling Street brownstone, pledged as secondary collateral my father insisted he didn't fully understand, went to a sheriff sale in June, the same brownstone where Renata had once poured coffee at that kitchen table and called theft a bridge loan. Brielle and Bloom's Bucktown location closed in May with a hand-lettered sign taped inside the glass. The Lincoln Park flagship followed in July, the same storefront where Brielle had cut a ribbon 18 months earlier while Renata cried real tears for the cameras. Brielle's Range Rover was repossessed from a Whole Foods parking lot on Halsted Street in front of a small, curious crowd, an event Sadie Kwan, fired without severance once the boutique's payroll account was frozen, described to me in a long, guilt-soaked voicemail I never returned. Grant's engagement to me had already ended by the time a routine hospital compliance audit flagged an undisclosed $30,000 gift toward a condo down payment he shared with Brielle, money the auditors traced, once they pulled statements, directly back through Renata to First Lakeshore Trust Bank, and from there to my mother's trust. I thought about that RPM steak dinner often that year, the champagne flute, the laughing voice telling me family comes first, don't be dramatic, you'll figure something out. I thought about it especially in July, when Renata called me for the first time in 4 months and asked if we could meet. I chose the place. Not RPM steak. A diner on Wells Street called Manny's, fluorescent-lit, $8 lunch specials, because I wanted her to feel exactly how far the ground had moved beneath both of us. Renata looked smaller than I remembered her being, not older, exactly, just diminished, the way expensive things look diminished once you find out they were never actually paid for. Brielle came with her, mascara doing work her composure couldn't manage anymore. My father didn't come. He sent a text instead, 3 lines long, about not knowing how any of this had happened, which was, I thought, a fairly accurate summary of his entire parenting philosophy in 11 words. Nora, please. Renata's hands shook around a coffee cup she never touched. You're seeing that man from cold water. Everyone knows he runs the company now. One phone call, that's all we're asking. One phone call and they ease up on the guarantee, restructure it, something. I'm not dating Adrian to run your errands, I said. And even if I were, I wouldn't make that call. We're your family. Brielle's voice cracked on the word family, like it still meant something to her only when she needed it to. Whatever happened with Grant, that was between him and me. It has nothing to do with the loan. You slept with my fiancé for 14 months, I said, in a condo my mother's cancer money helped furnish. I know exactly what it has to do with the loan. Renata's composure finally broke all the way. I raised you. I put a roof over your head for 7 years. Doesn't that count for anything? You put a roof over my head using a trust fund my mother left so I would never have to ask anyone for anything, I said. And then you made sure I never got to use $1 of it. Family comes first, you said that to me, word for word, over steak, in front of 11 people. I remember every syllable of that dinner. I'm going to remember it for the rest of my life, so don't you dare stand here and tell me I don't understand what family cost me. So this is revenge. Renata's voice had gone flat, accusing, the mask slipping into something almost like fear. You planned this. You and that man. I didn't forge my father's signature onto a business loan, I said, standing, pulling my coat from the back of the booth. I didn't spend my dead mother's money on a Range Rover. I didn't sleep with anyone's fiancé. I didn't do anything, Renata. I just stopped covering for the people who did. I left a 20 on the table for a meal I hadn't ordered and looked at both of them once more, really looked, the way you check a wound to see if it's actually closed. I hope Brielle finds something she's genuinely good at. I hope you find someone else to fund your next idea. It won't be me. It was never supposed to be me in the first place. I walked out of Manny's into July sunlight and didn't look back, and for the first time since September 9, 2019, the old Nora's reflex to fix things, to soften them, to make sure everyone else was okay before she let herself be okay, simply didn't fire. That reflex had died on the Kennedy Expressway in a life that no longer existed anywhere except inside my own skull. I let it stay dead. I started my residency in emergency medicine at Northwestern Memorial in June of 2022. The same city, a different wing of the same hospital where I'd once scribbled notes for other doctors at 2 a.m, a life built entirely on decisions the people who raised me never got a chance to touch. Adrian proposed on the Riverwalk that October, not with a rescue fantasy speech, but with a plain sentence I still keep folded in a drawer at home. I like watching you build things that are actually yours. I said yes, because for the first time in either life, someone wanted to add to what I had instead of quietly subtracting from it. I heard, secondhand, that Renata works retail now at an outlet mall on the northwest side, that Brielle waits tables somewhere in Rogers Park, that my father lost the company but kept a small apartment and a quiet, chastened kind of dignity I almost respect, almost. I don't call any of them. I don't need to. I already collected the only debt I ever actually owed anyone in that family, and it was owed to myself, plus interest, paid in full. They taught me, in my first life, that love was something you earned by disappearing. I came back from the dead to teach myself a better lesson. The people who bleed you dry will always mistake your silence for weakness, right up until the moment they realize you were never planning to bleed for them again. You were just waiting for the fire, and this time, it was finally yours to light, yours to feed, and yours alone to control. If this story of betrayal, rebirth, and quiet, devastating revenge kept you hooked, hit like, share it with someone who loves a plot twist, and subscribe for more Reborn drama stories.